This is the World Organic News for the week ending 13th of May 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Episode 168. The Revolution Takes Shape. As you may recall, I finished last week's episode in a bit of a frustrated funk. We know what to do, we have the techniques to do it, but our political classes are still fighting battles from 15 years ago. So this past week has been one of deep contemplation, discussion with peers, and a moment of satori, a moment of enlightened clarity, if you like. Let me explain. Looking at the big things that have changed parts of society in this millennium, I came to a conclusion. These things are virtuous. Single-use plastic bags from supermarkets being banned, incandescent bulbs being withdrawn from sale, and the wonders of separating household waste for collection all have a few things in common. Like I said, they are virtuous. They give us a warm inner glow, apparently. But they do not make our lives any easier. And they make very little difference to greenhouse gas accumulations. That those plastic bags are called single-use is a misnomer to begin with. We always used ours for more than just bringing home shopping. As we know by now, plastic can be made from renewable sources that are biodegradable. But we have to have the virtuous effects to make change worthwhile, apparently. Most people I have observed have just replaced thin single-use plastic bags with heavy-duty plastic bags. I've also observed that many people still use these as if they were a single-use bag, so that the organisations pushing for the change can feel warm and fuzzy, but the on-the-ground effects are quite negligible. With the loss of incandescent bulbs, we lost a simple way to keep chicks warm in a brooder, but that's not a big market segment, I will concede. What we do have is lighting that's inferior to what went before, and a huge increase in the consumption of mercury and its release when these things are not disposed of properly. And it also turns out that much of the separated household waste ends up in the same tip, or dump if that's your word where you live. Clearly this is a resource going to waste. Waste in the Bill Mollison sense of a resource in the wrong place. But what to do? A federal election next Saturday does not provide much hope. The left of centre parties are stuck in the decarbonise the air part of the show's tagline, but no one I could find was talking about the soil. The right of centre parties are still in the climate change is a hoax level of thinking. Google searches revealed a few things. There is plenty of info, organisation and advocacy for regenerative techniques for agriculture, and this is a plus in my mind. There is very little on how these things can be brought to bear on the greatest consumers of water, glyphosate, pesticides and fungicides, the suburban and urban regions of the world. To make matters worse, or perhaps to concentrate the mind even more, 68% of humanity will be living in these areas by 2050, according to a UN report. There's a link in the show notes. At about the same time as all this was happening, my other favourite Bill Mollison quote kept tapping on the inside of my skull. Quote, "The greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production, even if on a small scale, in our own gardens. If only 10% of us do this, there is enough for everyone." End quote. And another more annoying quote, whose origin I have no idea, joined in. Quote, "Be the change you want to see." End quote. So to that end, wheels were set in motion, ideas were brainstormed, and any other metaphor you care to insert here. I have joined with my co-host from the Permaculture Plus podcast, Rich Bowden, to create an online seminar/conference set for the 16th to the 21st of September. These will run annually, but the inaugural event, Living Soils 2019, will be focusing on permaculture zones 1 and 2. There's a link in the show notes that explains the zones if you're not sure what they are, and on how to create in those zones a regenerative garden. We're contacting specialists to present at the event, biodynamics, biochar, permaculture, and if any of my obviously good-looking and deeply thoughtful listeners have any suggestions, I'd be happy to hear them. Email me at redocean112@gmail.com. There's a link in the show notes. We are in the planning stage, so more will be revealed as we lock things in. The effect changing 10% of suburbia from consumption to production in a regenerative form is mind-blowing. In the same way suburbia has become a renewable engine of massive proportions, With the falling price of PV cells, I'm sure we can turn this part of the land surface of the Earth into a carbon sink powerhouse. The other thing to note with the PV cells is that this is being driven by price and actual advantage to the people placing them on their roofs as well as others. So from window boxes to McMansions to small holders and even huge agricultural affairs, people live in dwellings, and this is where we need to start. From every front and back door we can roll out the regen revolution. And unlike the virtuous ideas discussed above, this actually makes our lives and the climate situation better, and you end up with food. Food that doesn't need to be purchased from elsewhere, so this actually saves you money. Reduces food kilometerage, mileage if you're on the old money, and is still a benefit for the biosphere. So next week I'll return to the usual form of the podcast with news from around the world, but I'm also adding a What's Happening section for the Living Soils 2019 online conference, or whatever it is we end up calling it. And on that no longer frustrated but actually quite hopeful note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. The podcasting checklist is still available over at John Moore Podcasting Services, link in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.